I want to welcome our jurors and viewers from around the internet to another hearing of the grand jury, the citizens' grand jury, with our prosecutor, Larry Klayman. Larry, welcome back to the citizens' grand jury.
Well, thank you, Jason. A lot of things happening. And today we're going to be following up on the prior 6 sessions of our citizens' grand jury that you could see if you want to go back and review them. And I asked the jurors to do that as well, because we'll be issuing, as we said, very detailed indictments following the findings, which have already indicted Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, James Biden, Kerry, John Kerry, and Mitch McConnell. And there's more to come, obviously. But today we're following up on some very serious events. The world is at war in the Middle East. The cause of that war is caused, obviously, cause and effect, by the Biden-Harris regime. The Biden-Harris regime is stocked with a lot of, frankly, anti-Semites, anti-Christians. You have a lot of people on the Jewish left, and everybody knows I'm a Jewish Christian, I'm Messianic, so no one can accuse me of being anti-Semitic. But these people hate Israel. And the rapprochement with the Iranian regime, the Islamic regime, by John Kerry, by Joe Biden, by others in the administration, the State Department, which has always been extremely anti-Semitic, with the prospect of millions and millions, if not billions of dollars now going to Iran, which will be then used for terrorism, which the fact that Biden has already released funds that were embargoed that went through the UN to Hamas. These funds are used to buy rockets from Iran. Iran, in fact, is boasting about the fact that they've supplied the rockets. Israel's been hit with thousands and thousands of rockets. Jews and others, including Jewish Americans, are being stabbed in the streets. The country is now calling up reservists. This time, I hope this was a gratuitous comment. I hope that Netanyahu will do more than shoot his mouth off. I hope that he actually winds up shooting the Hamas leadership and eradicating them finally, because he's left this cancer to grow and he bears responsibility as well. But Biden's the primary cause, Biden and Harris. And you see this on every front. And we're going to talk about this today because it deals with our sedition charge. Is that your prosecutor, yours truly, firmly believes that Joe Biden has committed treason against the United States, against the people of the United States in a number of different areas. And we're strengthening this indictment for sedition today with more information that we're providing to the grand jury. Our cable news stations really are underplaying this whole situation in Israel. They're dealing with more issues of gas shortages. We're going to get into that. They're dealing with issues with regard to, critical race theory, which is another, frankly, treasonous act against this country to divide the races. Everything points to the simple fact, that the goal of Biden and Harris and the people around them is to destroy this country, to take it down to ground zero, which they nearly already have. We're hanging by a thread. To destroy every institution, every aspect of the American way of life, so they can have total control over the American people, to make us dependent on them. And that's the way communists do it. That's the way dictators do it. The seizure, or at least what we believe will soon be the seizure of guns, which have been advocated by Democrats like Beto O'Rourke and others, will follow this. And therefore, we have to nip this in the bud peacefully and legally. We are, now that things are clearing out, once these indictments are perfected, we will be holding trials and we will seek the convictions of Biden, of his son Hunter, of James Biden, of John Kerry, of Mitch McConnell, and then we'll move on to Comey, to McCabe, to Clapper, to Brennan, to frankly, other Republicans who have betrayed our trust, to federal judges who have subverted their oaths of office, to other government officials. Everyone must be held accountable. They better do it. We better do it quickly, because our country has already slipped away. And that's where we stand today. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about and present information that the Democrats now are preparing to indict Donald Trump on tax charges in New York City. There's now preparations underway that have been reported this morning of Democrats in Palm Beach County preparing to extradite Trump back to New York for criminal trial and arraignment. Arraignment first, criminal trial after that. It remains to be seen whether the government of Florida, who does have the power to block that indictment pending a review of whether it's legitimate or not. That'll be a real test for Governor DeSantis to do that. But it is a certainty that Trump will be indicted. Our so-called Supreme Court has given the green light to that several weeks ago by ordering that his tax records, all of them, be turned over to this rabid prosecutor, Cyrus Vance, the son of Cyrus Vance, the Secretary of State in the Carter administration, who did significant damage to the interests of this country with regard to Iran and other issues. Just one of the worst secretaries of state in American history, a leftist, an ultra-leftist, and his son is very similar to that. We're going to talk about the use of the FBI. We're going to present more information on that as a type of Gestapo, rounding up people around the country who were peacefully protesting. Yesterday, some of the congressmen, and they were severely attacked in the leftist media, has been saying what I'm saying, is that most of these people were peaceful. It wasn't an insurrection. It was something that occurred as a result, frankly, of what the political establishment had done, both Democrat and Republican, and not even giving Trump a hearing. But before that, just the rank corruption in all three branches of government that I write about in my book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry. It was the natural manure, as Jefferson put it, of the odor, of the stench that comes out of Washington, D.C. in particular, and people see what a charade it is. And then, of course, you see, even so-called conservative networks like Fox News going along with the fact that this was an insurrection. Just this morning, Geraldo Rivera, of all people, equated January 6th to what happened to Steve Scalise and Republicans back several years ago when they were attacked by an individual and shot at. Scalise nearly killed a lot of Republicans injured by someone who was trying to eliminate Republican leadership. And this FBI, which is corrupt to the core, run by Christopher Wray, just basically a yes man, basically a butt boy of Biden and Harris, said, oh no, this is just a police suicide that happened. Just unbelievable. The American people don't get the correct information. And if nothing else, these citizens' grand juries serve to present correct information to the American people in a number of areas. And of course, we do intend to seek to enforce the indictments. That is our right. And as I've said over and over again, and I want to say it again because people who are tuning in live stream, and it's growing every week, and people who go to freedomwatchusa.org and crowdsourcethetruth.com to watch it either live or in terms of recordations, need to understand that citizens' grand juries are, quote, legal, even under rulings of our now corrupt Supreme Court. At one time it was less corrupt, but now it's totally corrupt. The fact today is that Justice Antonin Scalia, back in 1992, in a case United States versus Williams, writing for the majority, found that the grand jury belongs to the American people, not to the three branches of government. And going back to the years before 1870, before Congress enacted a Justice Department, that was on July 1st, 1870, American people themselves meted out justice. Wyatt Earp is a good example of that. He had to take care of business when these criminals killed all of his brothers, notwithstanding innocent citizens in the West. And that's been, in fact, lionized over time in terms of his taking matters into his own legal hands. Now, he was a marshal. He was, a law enforcement official, but he didn't have anybody to back him up. And he was representing not just his own family, but the American people, to what happened at the OK Corral, and then just generally. So this is very important for people to understand, is that we believe in peaceful and legal means. We don't believe in harming anybody, but we need to enforce the rule of law because the corrupt establishment in Washington, D.C. on both sides of the aisle will simply not do it. And Republicans won't push. They'll just go on Sean Hannity or Fox News and raise money and beat their chest. I mean, a good example of that is Tom Cotton. I cannot stand watching him anymore. But there's also others like Lindsey Graham, like Rand Paul, like Ted Cruz. They're all talk, no action. They're a lot like Netanyahu in Israel in many ways. And the Israeli people are going to be rising up too. Because if they don't eliminate Hamas now, then you can forget about the Israelis even having a government. So this is what we're dealing with, and we're dealing with the issue not just in the United States, but worldwide. The people have the right to enforce the rule of law and the laws of nature and nature's God. And when it says that in the Declaration of Independence, in the opening phrase, which I repeat many, many times, paraphrasing it, when in the course of human events, the government, the so-called government, ceases to represent the people have a right, under the laws of nature and nature's God, to alter or abolish that government and to form a new government by and for the people with equal rights for everyone in pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. That's a paraphrase of what Jefferson and the other founding fathers wrote and enacted into law. So now is the time for us to take our legal system back, just like the founding fathers did when King George stole it and took it to the court of St. James. So we could not enforce the law against him and his yes man hack judges who kept rubber stamping his edicts. So this
Larry,
is something.
excuse me 1 second. We've got a bit of interference on your audio that I to address here very quickly. I'm sorry about that. I also want to remind our viewers watching us on the internet, support Larry and his team at Freedom Watch by going to freedomwatchusa.org. Larry, I also want to remind everybody about the Third Continental Congress that's coming up in Philadelphia on July 5th, and also to remind people that they should be subscribing to the Freedom Watch YouTube channel. The Citizens Grand Juries are simulcast on Freedom Watch as well as on Crowdsource the Truth. And I believe your audio issue has been resolved. Sorry for the interruption.
Thank you, Jason. In fact, I was getting to the Third Continental Congress, so I'm glad you raised that. So not only do we need to enforce the law, as the colonialists did when King George III took it away from us and then issued one edict after another with his hack yes men judges. They didn't have women in those days, rubber stamping his illegal edicts, much like our federal courts are now doing with Biden and his illegal edicts, day in and day out. But we also need to talk about creating a new government, not a new country, but a new government. And we need to talk about it seriously, and we need to reenact our Constitution with certain changes, or additions, I should say. Discrimination on the basis of political ideology and belief, making it clear that judges do not have immunity, and neither do government officials, that they're held to the same legal standards that we are held to. So they can't claim that over and over and over again and escape accountability. To come up with a system of selecting federal judges, not based on nominations and political patronage. How do they get their jobs now? They get their jobs on the bench through campaign contributions, by and large, sometimes out and out bribes. One judge from Rhode Island paid $500,000 to get his job, just greased the accounts of Sheldon Whitehouse and others up there in Rhode Island, which is a mafia-infested state. He's now on the bench. Other judges, to a lesser extent, but by and large, through political patronage. And if you look at the backgrounds of these judges, you see how they got there. They basically kissed the derriere of the establishment of the political party that ultimately nominated them, with jobs in the Justice Department and a political nature, political appointments, with working for senators and congressmen. That's how they get it. They did not get it through merit. They got it through connection. And I'm not saying that they're all unintelligent. They are intelligent people, and they know how to manipulate the system to scratch the backs of the people that got them their jobs, whether it's in government, whether it's in private industry, whether it's in labor unions, whether it's in academia, whether it's wherever they come from. They, by and large, they're bought and paid for by the people that put them on the bench. Now, that is a frightening situation, and it's why we don't have justice in this country. It's why the legal system has become the most corrupt profession in this country, frankly, and around the world. And look at Congress. Look to see who 90% of the congressmen and representatives are. They're lawyers. So this is a terrible situation. And this is the reason for being for our citizens' grand juries, is that we, the American people, are groping for a way to peacefully and legally, pursuant to the laws of nature and nature's God, not even necessarily the laws as written by Congress, because they're written to protect the people in power. But this is what our founding fathers said, is that we will look to divine providence to guide us. We will look to the 10 Commandments. We will look to the Talmud. We will look to the New Testament for a roadmap on how to carry things out. And in the old book of Isaiah, it states, Old Testament book of Isaiah, which Christians revere as well, particularly evangelicals. And I consider myself kind of an evangelical in my own right, which means that I go direct. It's like you don't need an intermediary to communicate with God and his Son. It says that God will restore the tarnished city to the faithful city, and he looks to the counselors and judges to do it. Well, if he was to look to the counselors and judges today, you can forget it. Okay, it's not going to happen. And that's why we need real judges, judges who represent the American people, untainted, unbought and paid for, who actually have the interests of the American people at heart. So getting back to the FBI being used as a Gestapo for Biden and Harris, and I would probably guess that most of the agents are against this, I would come to the conclusion that the reason for this is that we don't have anybody in power on the judiciary that can serve as a check. And we're also going to be presenting a letter. We're not going to comment upon it, but about 140 military leaders, ex-military leaders, retired generals and admirals, some of them I know, issued a letter yesterday to Biden questioning, his rise to power as president of the United States, so-called president, and Harris as well, also pointing out that he is mentally unfit to lead this country. We now have 20,000 troops in Washington, D.C. guarding Biden and Harris and their regime. And I would suggest that probably Biden and Harris are more afraid of those troops than they are of anything else, because the military and the police in this country, they've about had it too. And they see this country being destroyed, taking down to ground zero, really on our backs, pushing towards communism. And the letter refers to that as well. So this is where we find ourselves today. We're going to present information about the energy crisis, particularly on the East Coast, which is the result of canceling the pipeline from Alaska and other actions that Biden has taken. He bears responsibility for that. That is an act of treason as well. And of course, we have presented information about the southern border, allowing hordes of illegal immigrants, some of whom carrying variants of COVID-19 across the border, drug traffickers, sex traffickers, and young children who are sadly dying as a result of Biden giving the green light. Biden has given the green light to these illegal aliens flooding this country, much like he has given the green light to Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas to destroy Israel and, by extension, the great Satan, the United States. So this is where we are today. I urge people who do want to participate in the Citizens Grand Jury to contact me at leklayman@gmail.com. We'll see whether you will sit here neutrally. I know that I'm a prosecutor. See, I don't have to be neutral. But when you make a decision on whether to indict someone, you have to put politics aside and just look at the facts. Just the facts, stupid. Now, you're not stupid, but that's an expression that was used over time by politicians, so I'm throwing it back at them. But you need to just look at it objectively, because we want these indictments to hold up. We want the trials to go forward. We want to see convictions. We want to mete out sentences peacefully and legally. And when we do mete these sentences out, we will go forth to law enforcement throughout this country, sheriffs, police commissioners, others, and we will ask them to enforce these sentences. And you can see the seeds of that with 140 retired admirals and generals coming forward The people who keep us secure, whether it's military or the police, I believe will get to the point where they will act and they will enforce these convictions, the sentences. And that's what needs to be done. That's what we did in the Old West with Wyatt Earp and others. And that's what we will do again, because we do not have a legal system. Let me tell you something. I've been a lawyer for 44 years. You know, when I started Judicial Watch back in 1994, it was bad. And the name Judicial Watch came from watching judges. Judicial Watch doesn't really watch judges anymore. They get documents. That's mostly what they do. Okay, but the documents are no good if you don't use them to seek indictments, to bring hard-hitting cases. And that's what we now do at Freedom Watch. And that's what I'm asking the American people to join us doing, because we need to seek a peaceful solution. Otherwise, the prophecy of Jefferson will come true, as I wrote about in my book. It takes a revolution. We will someday, according to Jefferson, because of the degradation of morals and ethics in society. And Adams said the same thing, John Adams. There would be another revolution, and it would be bloody. And Jefferson added, what's a few thousand dead to refresh the tree of liberty? Jefferson did not want to see that. He was warning the American people, stay vigilant to ethics, morality, and the rule of law and God. Otherwise, it's likely to happen. And I don't want to see it happen. And Jason doesn't want to see it happen. And you don't want to see it happen. So that's why we need to enforce the rule of law, because we need to let the steam out. The steam is about ready to explode. It is exploding. You saw the first manifestations of it on January 6th, which was mostly peaceful and legal. But next time it may not be that way, which is why the FBI is being called out by Biden and Harris to round up anyone. Any dissent must be quashed. Any dissent on the internet by big tech must be quashed. Any dissent in local school boards or anywhere in this country must be destroyed. This is a relive of the book Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. And I urge you to go out. If you don't want to read it, you can get the audio, or you can watch the B movies that you'll find on Amazon.com and other places, because we are, in fact, in a world much worse than that. Ayn Rand wrote this book in 1958 when communism was on the rise. Now the country has been taken over by socialists and communists. It's come to pass. And I had a dream. I'm not Martin Luther King, but I had a dream last week before I got up that, and you don't usually remember dreams unless you have one right before you get up, but this one was so vivid, it shook me, is that I was in a hotel lobby and someone was walking around, people were walking around with shopping bags which said, "Who is Larry Klayman?" And in the book, Atlas Shrugged, the expression was, "Who is John Galt?" John Galt was an industrialist making engines. And he saw what was going on. And he left society. He recruited people from all branches, from corporations, from academia, scientists, doctors, etc., to leave the country. In other words, basically go into hiding, not leave the country, because he concluded that the only way that you could save the country was to deprive the government of any resource, any support, to take it down to zero. And then people of faith, people who believe in capitalism, people who believe in freedom, independence, would then rise up and take it back. Well, that was the theme of Ayn Rand in Atlas Shrugged. And it's not just Larry Klayman, who was Larry Klayman, but who are you? Who are you, the American people? Are you going to sit there and be entertained by Sean Hannity on Fox News, hearing the same thing every night with the same people that don't do anything? Or are you going to get up off the couch, as I say in my book, It Takes a Revolution, and peacefully and legally save this country? Are you going to go into retirement and say, okay, sorry, I'm going to spend what I made during my life. I'll be dead before this country goes under for the final count. But Jefferson and Washington and others, other founding fathers, didn't see it that way. They were millionaires in their own right. They didn't have to declare independence and fight a revolution. They did it for future generations, for their kids, their grandkids, for other Americans that would be living under the dictatorship of King George III and those who followed him. And my final point before we go on and showing the latest irreparable damage to the United States being caused by Biden, Harris, Kerry, and others, is ask yourself this fundamental question, which I say frequently on my podcasts and on my weekly radio shows. Who was worse, King George III or Biden and Harris? King George III was not a socialist. King George III was not a communist. King George III was not an atheist. He was not a radical Muslim. He was not a member of the Marxian Jewish left. He was not a radical feminist. He was not a radical LGBTQ. He was not a radical atheist. Give me King George III any day. It was Mother Teresa compared to the people who are running this country today. And that's why 140 retired military at the highest level came forward to give President Biden, again, it used to use the term loosely, and Vice President Kamala Harris also using the term loosely, a warning. And that warning, I hope that he takes seriously, because as Jefferson said, when the people fear the government, there's tyranny. But when the government fears the people, there's liberty. Okay, let's roll the videotape, as we say, and let's show what's been going on with John Kerry these days. He was at a hearing yesterday, and basically the guy out and out lied. Look at his demeanor. This guy is a thorough liar, in addition to being, frankly, a traitor to the United States. That was detailed by my client, Jerry Corsi, when he ran against George W. Bush. Unfit for Command was the name of the book. He was a traitor in Vietnam. His colleagues, his fellow servicemen attested to that. And he certainly is selling out the United States today, and that is an indictable crime. So let's hear the latest lies out of John Kerry.
I now recognize Representative Lee Zeldin of New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Kerry, did you meet with Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif in Munich during the Munich Security Conference in February 2019?
I don't know if I met with him in 2019. I don't have a recollection of 2019.
You don't remember the year.
I met with him. I know I met with him. I know I met with him in 2018, and I met with him. I think twice in 2018 and twice in 2017.
Do you recall meeting him in Munich during the Munich Security Conference?
I recall meeting him. I just can't remember exactly which year or when it was.
Were there other U.S. participants in that meeting?
Well, I think it was not a meeting. I think I just
were there other U.S.
pleasantries.
Were there other Americans with you in that discussion?
I don't recall. There were in one or two, but I don't recall which one.
In the meetings that you did have U.S. participants, who were the U.S. participants?
In Oslo, I met with I think John, a fellow named John Feiner might have been with me in Oslo. I don't know. In New York, I can't remember who was with me in New York. It was during the UNGA, during the United Nations meeting. And the Oslo meeting was a public event, which I did with the High Representative of EU, the former High Representative of EU. No, she was then still sitting High Representative. And it was hosted by the Norwegian Peace Institute.
Okay, well, I'm just asking if which U.S. participants were in the meeting. Any other names?
But I remember I had other people with me. I have to go back and figure out. I don't recall who was the traveling party.
Did the discussion involve foreign affairs?
Writ large, yeah.
Did it involve U.S. foreign policy?
It involved sort of listening to views of what is happening in the world. Where are we? Where are we going? What do you think about this? It's a general conversation, similar to one, by the way, that many members of Congress met with him during that same period when I was in New York and had a meeting in New York. He met with Congress. He met with the New York Times editorial board. He was on TV.
Yeah,
it was
I'm just asking about your meetings. Any other meetings with, how many meetings did you have with Zarif during the Trump administration?
I think during the Trump administration, I had 4 meetings.
Did you have any phone calls with Zarif during the Trump administration?
No.
Would messages, communications be passed between the two of you
No.
separately?
No,
Through
the only
third
time
parties?
we ever had any communication was about the specific meeting to get together to compare notes on what was happening in the world.
Did you have access, did you obtain any classified information during the Trump administration?
No.
Do you recall having a conversation with the House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff at the Munich Security Conference? Do you recall having an extended conversation with the House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff at the Munich Security Conference?
I think we had a beer in the Ratskeller underneath the thing, but I don't recall specifically very much.
Okay, there was a main room, because I was there as well. There was a main room where there was a bunch of speakers, and I was there, I watched. I mean, you guys had an extended conversation. You don't recall that conversation?
In the main hall?
Yes.
It's entirely possible. I remember sitting with him having a beer. It was more fun.
But you don't recall having that conversation with the chairman?
I don't recall the conversation. It's entirely. I think he sat beside me. We sat on the right side of the hall, looking towards the stage, and I think we sat there.
Okay. Well, I mean, you guys were standing, but when you guys met with Zarif, when you were talking about U.S. foreign policy, would you advocate for your position on policy?
The only time I didn't advocate for my position, when I met with him, during the period of time I met with Zarif, we were in the agreement. From the time President Trump pulled out of the agreement in May of 2018, and I don't recall having another conversation with Zarif after that.
Well, we're running out of time. We have one president at a time, and those conversations weren't helpful. I yield back.
Well, one president at a
Gentleman's
time
time
I'll
has
say it.
expired. I now recognize Representative David Cicilline of Rhode Island for 5 minutes.
This will be good. This guy's mafia
Thank you for your
connected.
service to our
Come on.
country. I just want to correct my friend, Mr. Keating. Of course, Rhode Island is the offshore wind capital of America. The project he's speaking about is the second one, and we welcome the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to the industry. But seriously, it's exciting for Rhode Island and Massachusetts, but obviously particularly exciting for us in Rhode Island as we lead the industry in this area. There's been a lot of discussion about the importance of climate, responding to the climate crisis because of the consequences to our planet, our ability to maintain a habitable planet, and obviously understanding the economic opportunities that renewable energies present. But I'd also like you to spend a moment talking about what the implications are to conflicts around the world. We know climate change risks starting, prolonging, or exacerbating armed conflicts around the world. The UN Security Council meeting organized by the United Kingdom recently sought to expose the links between our warming climate and conflict. We've seen how drought has made the conflict in Syria that much more difficult, and how states like Mali face threats from insurgents because of issues like food insecurity. And I think it's one thing that people don't hear enough about, and so I'd love to hear your thoughts on the nexus between climate change and conflict, and why, if we don't invest in a real climate response, that we might risk further conflicts in the future. And the second question, and I'll give you time to answer both of them, is there was a recent report by the UN Environment Program that outlines the importance of dramatically and quickly reducing global emissions of methane, and because of all the dangers that methane presents. And particularly since methane helps create smog, cutting emissions in half could prevent as many as 250,000 deaths each year worldwide if we do this. Can you speak about the UNEP report and what steps the Biden administration is taking, both here in the United States and in concert with our partners around the world, to reduce methane emissions?
I'll try to run through that really quickly. First of all, the implications of the climate crisis to all of us in terms of foreign policy and military are that you could have millions of people who are homeless. Literally, their habitat is no longer habitable. Last year in Pakistan, it was 130 degrees in one community. In the Middle East, it was 130 degrees. Here in California, in Death Valley, it was 130 degrees. The human body is not prepared, or it's not meant to be living in 130 degrees. It's going to go up still in some of those places. We've seen heat waves in the ocean, literally, with massive die-off and impact on the food protein source for millions, billions of people, actually. So as that gets disrupted, you're going to have downstream impacts. If the Himalayas cease to have the ice or begin to reduce in its amount, you're already seeing water impacts. Rivers are going to start to dry up. Billions of people rely on those rivers for food in parts of the world. The Mekong, the Yellow River, the Yangtze, the Ganges. These rivers are all sourced in places that rely on the ice sheet, the melt, the snow. As that changes, you could have profound impacts. This is not conjectural. It's already happening in certain places. There are climate refugees today, just not yet in the millions, depending on.
Stop this right now, Jason, if you
collapse
can.
In a region.
Yeah, this is not comedy at the comedy shop on Sunset Boulevard, okay? You know, this thing is a charade, okay? And you can see how he couldn't remember anything when it came to Iran. But now he has a great recollection of what's going to happen to the world with global warming. But I think the most comedic aspect of this, actually is tragic, is his wearing the mask and his yes men aides behind him wearing the mask when they've all been vaccinated, when they're more than 6 feet away from each other. This is part of the whole plan to keep total control of the American people, total domination and control by controlling you in every aspect of your life, including how you go about your daily business. So, I mean, it's a joke, and a very, very bad joke. Now, is there anything else on this video, Jason, that deals with Iran and selling out the American people?
It was mostly from Zeldin, Larry. It's about a 2-hour testimony. I think it's interesting that when they asked him about climate change, we seemed to hit a well-rehearsed talking point, and he can remember all these details about where he had a beer, but that's it. Nothing about what you're asking, Mr.
Right.
Congressman.
And well, you look at the demeanor, you look at the way he's shifting around, look at his hands, flicking his, any jury consultant would say this guy's lying. There's no question about it. And his eyes shifting back and forth. I mean, shifting back and forth faster than Howdy Doody when I was a kid. So this is where we are in that
Sorry,
regard.
Larry, would you agree that he hit a comfort zone when he was talking about climate? It seemed almost like a rehearsed speech about the climate.
Yeah, that's the mantra. That's the Democrat mantra on things. And again, I mean, everything changes in the world, even climate, okay? But to paint it as absolutely dire and catastrophic when people in the Middle East are dying, Israelis, Americans, and others in the places exploding, and you've just now effectively admitted that you passed information to the Iranians and we're doing foreign policy behind the back of Donald Trump. I mean, that's why you can't remember anything. Now, during the Clinton years, I write about it in my book, Wars at Why and How I Came to Fight the Establishment, because I would depose a number of the people of the Clinton White House. Anytime they didn't want to answer a question, they were coached to say, I have no specific recollection, whether it was James Carville, George Stephanopoulos, whether it was Mac McClarty, who was White House Chief of Staff, whether it was John Wong, although he had a little difficulty articulating language-wise, but they were coached to say, I don't remember. And that's what lawyers coach their clients to do, regrettably, basically to lie, because they know that they can't get held to account for perjury. So they think by saying that. But there's enough evidence here with regard to Kerry to indict him. Now, do we have anything, it's out there in the media, but about the release of a huge amount of money to Hamas that Biden ordered, which now obviously is going into attacking Israel? That was recent.
Yes, I do have that, Larry. And also, I just wanted to ask, it seemed to me that Representative Zeldin was trying to ask questions of Mr. Kerry that basically what he's asking him is, didn't he do the same exact thing as General Flynn?
No, that's an excellent point. Yes, he did the exact same thing that General Flynn was accused of, conducting foreign policy before he had a right to do it. Now, Flynn actually had a right to do what he did because he was part of a new administration. It was during transition. This is done. I mean, they're even left-wing television shows. I remember, I'm trying to remember the name of the show. Maybe it was Homeland, that showed the Secretary of State to be coordinating future foreign policy with a new female president. Okay, so, this is something which is done, what Flynn did, and it's accepted practice. But this is different because Trump was firmly in control. He was in control of foreign policy. And we see that foreign policy worked during the Trump administration. Not one terrorist attack in this country, not one Muslim terrorist attack. And the Middle East was calm. And they knew that if they reacted, if they rose up, that Trump would back Israel. Now, we know that that's not happening now, is that Biden and Harris are telling the world, well, we're in favor of Israeli security, but we're also in favor of the Palestinians' right to have a homeland. Excuse me. And this was all triggered. It was finally triggered by the fact that Israel had to evict a couple Arabs in East Jerusalem because they didn't pay their rent. Okay, that's what it's about. So this was something that they were planning to do, the Palestinians and Hamas and others. They were just waiting for the opportunity for Biden to become president and to give him the green light. But what do you have there, Jason? This is an article about.
This is a New York Times article from. Yeah, a New York
Yeah.
Times article from April 7th, just a little more than a month ago, informing us that the Biden administration will release funds and send $235 million in assistance to the Palestinians. And the question that it raises in my mind, Larry, is if they're funding the Palestinians and also publicly saying that they support Israel, is this not funding both sides of a conflict and fomenting war?
Stop there and scrolling down. Go back up again to Anthony Blinken.
Anthony
Okay.
Blinken.
Yeah, okay.
In a statement on Wednesday, Secretary of State Anthony J. Blinken said the United States would provide $150 million in humanitarian aid funneled through the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, a vast agency created 72 years ago to assist displaced Palestinians.
Yes, well,
The 75.
once Hamas gets that money, it is not used primarily for humanitarian aid. It either goes to the bank accounts of Hamas leaders in Switzerland or elsewhere, or to purchase weapons to use against Israel. Now, Anthony Blinken, go back up to that. This is what I'm talking about, and I can say it, okay, as a Jew, a proud Jew, and as a Zionist. This guy is from the Jewish left. He's Jewish, quote unquote, not really, but he was born Jewish. Because if he was really Jewish, he wouldn't be handing over $150 million to people that want to kill Jewish people and Christians. And these are the kinds of people that Biden and Harris have in their administration. They're the disciples of George Soros, who, with his father, confiscated the property of Jews going to their death in gas chambers and ovens. These are the people who are the biggest threat to Israel, and they're a threat to the United States. And I call them out. They are not Jews. I don't want to see anti-Semitism rise in this country, but when I see them involved in things like this, my blood boils. These are the disciples of Marx, Trotsky, Alinsky, and Soros. So I want people to know that, and I want Jews to react internally to legally and peacefully rid this country of these kinds of people, because they're despicable and they're very, very dangerous.
Larry, quickly, speaking of Saul Alinsky, for anyone who is not aware of the relationship between Saul Alinsky and our current vice president's political mentor, being generous, this is Saul Alinsky speaking with Willie Brown.
Yeah, it's surprising. I guess that's before Willie betted Kamala Harris. He looks a little young there.
Yeah.
But anyway, these are the people that are involved. By the way, Willie Brown was deeply involved with China too. I know that when I was at Judicial Watch, when I deposed Belinda Yee, who was Willie Brown's assistant and disciple. I got to give Willie credit for one thing. At least he was competent, even if evil. At least San Francisco wasn't, a fertile ground for feces, drug dealers, and drug addicts in those days.
But back in
At least around the city.
2001,
Yeah.
the San Francisco Gate reported that then Mayor Willie Brown got a low-key early warning about air travel on 9/11. Someone warned him not to go to New York on the morning of September 11th, 2001.
Well, that's interesting. Well, what goes around comes around, but that'll be the subject of another citizens' grand jury, undoubtedly. But I want to play right now, Jason, some video footage of what's going on in Israel right now, so you can fully appreciate the terrible situation that Christians and Jews now face in that country, and it's going to spill over to this country shortly.
We've got some footage here from The Guardian, Larry.
A leftist publication, nevertheless.
This is from 2 days ago. Entire buildings being destroyed, being hit by an airstrike. They're showing Israeli missiles hitting Palestinian neighborhoods. There have been a lot of reports of Palestinian friendly fire killing Palestinians.
Well, that's typical for The Guardian. I mean, I want you to see this because the media backs everything up. But the reality is that there have been tens of Israelis killed, young children, synagogues attacked, people stabbed in the streets by Palestinians. All hell's breaking loose right now.
It's odd to me, Larry, that so many people villainize Israel, and without taking a particular position with either side. Most modern countries were born by invading someplace, killing everybody there, and taking it, including our own.
Well, but that's not true with Israel, okay? Israel is the land of Zion. Israel was given to the Jewish people, and by extension, Christians. Jesus was a Jew by God. But even if that is not the case, which it is, then when a nation is formed, back in 1948, and of course they don't teach this in schools right now, they teach that Israel's an apartheid state, exactly what Rashida Tlaib and Ilham Omar, the vile hate that they spread, the anti-Semitism, anti-Christianity that they spread on a daily basis, which the Democratic Party by and large agrees with. But Israel was formed in 1948 after the Holocaust because the Jews needed some kind of security, place to go, from Europe. As a practical matter, they had no place to go. You can watch the movie Exodus. By the way, my very good friend Pat Boone wrote the lyrics to that song. It's one of the greatest songs ever written. This land is my land. But it was divided up by the United Nations. Maybe the way they did it was not a terribly good idea. And half of it went to the Arabs, half went to the Muslims, half went to the Israelis. They both had lived there before. Of course, Israel, Jews and Arabs, didn't totally get along up to that point, and that's to put it mildly. But the fact is that they had half the land. But that wasn't good enough for the Arabs and Muslims. They had to try to annihilate the Jewish people, and they moved on the Jewish people in 1948. And by the grace of God, Jews prevailed. Okay, and then in 1967, the Arabs were planning to destroy Israel. They amassed on Israel's border. Israel struck first with their air force. By the way, their planes in those days were given to them by the French. The French were a great supporter of Israel, and Charles de Gaulle and others. De Gaulle was no longer in power, but the French were. The French had been a great friend of Israel, believe it or not. And they won. They acquired these territories in East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights. So the bottom line here is that if you want to annihilate somebody and you want to destroy them and you lose, tough luck. You've lost. And Israel's kept that property, not as an occupier, but as someone that was part of the land of Zion to begin with, including the West Bank. Since then, for security reasons, Israel is only 12 miles apart in the center. If you cut it in half between Egypt and Jordan, Israel can easily be driven into the sea, is what the Arabs, were planning to do and still plan to do. That's what they want to do. And it's gotten worse. The Palestinians back in those days were a learned intellectual people. They're very similar to the Jews in that regard. But over time, they've been turned into barbarians. They've been turned into terrorists because of the educational system that teaches them that Jews are their enemy. They're not their enemy. The Arab states didn't want the Palestinians. They feared them because the Palestinians were well educated and could burrow into high levels of government and control. So the Arabs kept them out of their country, and they had to remain, by and large, in greater Israel, in the West Bank and otherwise. And that's how this fight started, is because there have been Israelis who have lived on the east part of Jerusalem forever. And so it's not that they become an occupying power, they have not. And in this instance, it was a few homes, people, the Arabs who didn't pay their rent, who were evicted. And that's not to say that they could not have found other ways to acquire an abode. But this was a pretext because it was planned. It was planned because they knew that people like Anthony Blinken and Biden and Harris would give them the green light to now go against Israeli interests, against Jews, against Christians. And this administration of Biden and Harris, in my opinion, is by and large mostly atheist, mostly not Christian, not Jewish. And you can see the effects of that right now. But enough said on that, because the cause of this, the primary cause of this, is Biden giving a green light to Iran. Iran now knows with the new treaty, they're going to get all kinds of money, and they're boasting about it, to use against Israel and against the United States and against the West, and also freeing up the money at the United Nations to give to the Palestinians, which means it's going to Hamas in Gaza and other radical elements of the Palestinian so-called movement. And Biden is the root cause. And then what does he say? He equates Israel with the Palestinians in terms of what's going on today. There's no equation. There's no moral equivalence here. They've wanted to annihilate, to exterminate Jews and Christians now for thousands of years. Fortunately, they're not the sharpest knife in the drawer, and they haven't succeeded thus far, but they're getting better educated. Okay, 6,000 years they've been trying to destroy us. And now they've been given the green light by Biden. So yes, he has committed sedition because it's affecting Americans in Israel. There are many that have dual citizenship. And also it will spill over to the United States in terms of terrorism very, very shortly. So that's that. Now let's move on. I want to show something here about what Biden and Harris are obviously coordinating with, as I said at the beginning, this ultra-leftist district attorney, Cyrus Vance, that's about ready to indict President Trump any minute in New York over alleged tax fraud and tax evasion. Plans are now being made to have President Trump extradited back to New York for arraignment and trial. And who's involved with that? The clerk in Palm Beach County just happened to have worked coincidentally, not coincidentally, with Frank Biden, the president's brother, at his law firm down there in South Florida. Let's just show this article.
I had it here. There we go. That's from The Hill. It's Palm Beach is planning for the possibility of a Donald Trump indictment.
Can you read a little bit of that, Jason? Because your eyes are much better than mine.
Officials in Palm Beach, Florida, are reportedly considering a course of action should former President Trump be indicted by Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance Jr. while he's staying at Mar-a-Lago. According to Politico, law enforcement officials in the town have discussed how to handle a possible extradition if Trump is indicted by authorities investigating whether he committed banking and tax fraud. The news outlet notes Trump's location would affect potential extradition proceedings, as Florida's extradition statute gives Governor Ron DeSantis the ability to intervene and determine whether someone should be surrendered to out-of-state law enforcement. The statute leaves room for interpretation that the government has the power to order a review and potentially not comply with the extradition notice, Joseph Abruzzo, Circuit Court Clerk of Palm Beach County, told Politico. Abruzzo is reportedly a former associate of President Biden's younger brother, Frank, but he told the outlet the full extent of the law will be followed and carried out appropriately without bias. If Trump travels to Bedminster, New Jersey, as Mar-a-Lago closes for the season, however, his prospects could change. The state has a similar statute to Florida, but the governor, Democrat Phil Murphy, is not an ardent supporter of Trump like DeSantis is, Politico noted.
Well, yeah, just coincidentally, the brother of Joe Biden is in charge as a clerk in terms of executing extradition warrant back to New York. So yes, Trump will be indicted. The whole purpose is to destroy him, to destroy his supporters. This gets back to the FBI being used as Gestapo against people that were there peacefully. I mean, they're rounding people up, and you should see some of the things that hack judges, Obama and Clinton appointed judges, are saying about people who are simply charged with trespass into the Capitol. And by the way, is it trespass when the American people own the Capitol, assuming they didn't break any buildings or didn't, steal any property or even are alleged to obstruct justice? Is that a crime? So it's to send a message to all of us that we should keep our mouths shut. We get down in a crouched position and just submit to the socialist, leftist, atheist takeover of this country. And that's why 140 military officers, former military officers, I didn't even know about it, wrote this letter. And, basically they are sending a warning to Biden and Harris. And Biden and Harris cannot assume that the 20,000 troops that are in Washington right now support them. I don't think they do. So that's where we are. And let's now show some tape on the energy crisis, which has been caused because a lot of, the energy market is the result of expectations and forecasts on what's going to happen. And the energy companies react and consumers react and retailers react to what's going on. And canceling the pipeline from Alaska, caused it also, the overemphasis in moving to green energy, Green New Deal, et cetera. This all contributed to this energy crisis. And the irony is that Biden, Harris, and the leftists that support them welcome this because, again, they want to take us down. They want to destroy this country so they'll have total control over us. And one way they can do that is through energy.
Yeah, Larry, most of these videos are showing long lines at gas pumps all across the East Coast and even fights, violent fights breaking out as the pipeline has been turned back on. We've heard allegations that this Colonial Pipeline was hit by a cyber attack. For me, Larry, it really echoes the same modus operandi that we heard with regard to election hacking. We hear that there was a cyber attack, but there's been no press conference with members of the NSA or other agencies that would protect the electronic and other elements of critical infrastructure in the United States. They haven't really told us how this hack occurred, who caused it, and we've discussed, Larry, how so much money is spent on U.S. intelligence agencies if they're unable to protect critical infrastructure from such a dangerous hack. Aren't they incompetent?
Well, it's worse than incompetence, Jason. They have the information. They keep it from the American people, you see. And the NSA acquires all, by the way, this is an interesting point with Kerry, is that Kerry said that he didn't have any telephone communications with Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran. The reason he didn't have any telephone communications is he knows that they would be intercepted, they would be obtained by NSA and the intelligence agency. So everything was done in person. That tells you something right there. But the NSA otherwise has all communications worldwide. There are other countries in the world with the same degree of sophistication as our NSA. The British intelligence services are much better than the American intelligence services. And I'm not just pointing to James Bond movies, but that's a fact. MI15, MI16. The French intelligence agencies are better than our intelligence agencies. Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, is better than all of them combined. So, and the Italians are very good as well. So everybody knows what happened in every respect, but they don't want to cough it up. The sham 33,000 Hillary Clinton emails that went missing, a total lie to the American people that they could not be obtained. The NSA had them all of them. But both political parties in the end protect each other, and this just becomes a dog and pony show. Simple dog and pony show, for entertainment, to raise money, to get your face on Fox News or MSNBC or CNN, as the case may be. But they know. And, to extend this a little bit further, and we're going to get into this in the future, is that I have a very good friend and colleague who took the Moderna vaccine. Excuse me. A little postnasal drip. And, you know, he was a big proponent of taking it. And I said, don't take it. And don't take the risk. We don't know the long-term effects. Well, he almost died in the last few days. Took the second
Wow.
shot. Started
That's what you
shaking,
told me about.
convulsing,
Oh my gosh.
convulsing, still not totally recovered. Now, whether or not this vaccine works, whether or not it'll last more than 6 months, whether or not it protects from the variants, the fact is that all the information has not been given to the American people. It's been withheld. There's a tremendous profit motive of big pharma. They're making trillions and trillions of dollars. And there's a motive, there's a motive of the politicians to say, okay, we're your great savior. Okay, and in this respect, I'm critical of President Trump too, because he wanted something to promote his political future. So he oversold this. The networks are doing the same thing, and you can see it. But the American people don't get all the facts. And this is an area that we're going to be looking into as well, because there are many people that have died. On a television show I did last week where I host for Alan Keyes on Let's Talk America, I had my Israeli colleagues on from Tel Aviv. Thousands of people have died from the Pfizer vaccine in Israel. That's the vaccine that the government has used. And many people are very, very sick and injured. So regardless of whether one should take it, and that's your own individual decision, is the fact that all the information has not been given to the people of the world in that respect. And then we see the charade of John Kerry and his little derriere butt boys sitting behind him and girls wearing masks when in fact, you know, they say that we have been saved by the vaccine. I mean, Kerry couldn't even wear his mask. It was falling off. I mean, it was so ridiculous. So in any event, it also hid, you know, his demeanor in terms of his speech and helped him lie even further because he was hiding behind the mask. So that's where we are, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Okay, we have sent you preliminary finding forms with regard to the indictments of Biden and Harris, Biden and Hunter and James Biden with regard to Mitch McConnell, with regard to John Kerry. And we will be flushing out these indictments. I want to be very, very precise. So I'm taking more time. But next week is a certainty. My staff will be working with me, and we will have, based upon the information and evidence that have been provided to you, very succinct indictments. And then we will ask that you issue them. We will then serve them on Biden, Hunter, and James Biden, on McConnell, and also on Kerry. And we will proceed to trial, and then we'll move on to others who will be subject to the citizens' grand jury. So I want to thank you for participating. I also want to mention that we do have a Third Continental Congress in Philadelphia on July 5th and 6th, and I hope that you'll be there. If you can go to Freedom Watch's website. If it's not up there right now, it will be by the end of the day. For $150, you can purchase a ticket to participate. We do reserve the right to turn people away if it looks like it's a security risk. You know, leftists and others could be infiltrating this. And actually, if you're a leftist and you believe in freedom, you can come as well, as long as you're nonviolent and don't disrupt. But the thing here is that we need to seriously begin the discussion about creating a new government by and for the people and reenacting our Constitution with protections. And I'm bringing learned people in from around the country. I'm going to invite the people who signed, the retired admirals and generals who signed the letter yesterday to so-called President Biden and so-called Vice President Kamala Harris. And I say so-called because real presidents and vice presidents don't try to destroy the country. And they're welcome to come, and everybody's welcome to come, and we need to have this discussion. It's at Independence Hall, across at the Visitor Center. There's a backdrop, and we're going to have other events, and we're in the planning process right now. We're also going to put up on our website suggestions on where you can stay, you know, in Philadelphia. That's my native city. I know to some extent. I haven't been there that much in the last many years, as I still have family there. But you know, I hope that you will come, because and take a tour of Independence Hall at that time, because that is our true hallowed ground. That is where it all began, and that's where it's going to be rejuvenated in terms of this country, not the fake Greek buildings in Washington, D.C. that don't represent our heritage at all. And the White House does, a few other buildings do, but the rest of it looks like Disney World. We want to go back to the real deal, and the real deal is in Independence Hall in Philadelphia. And our goal is to set up a new government at Independence Hall. And I do believe that the military and the police will support this nonviolently. So I want you to go to Freedom Watch USA today and look at this. I also want you to support Jason to crowdsource the truth. This would not be possible without him. Jason is under attack constantly by people that don't want the truth to come out. Therefore, crowdsource the truth. And others like that, Radio America, where I have my podcasts and weekly radio shows, and other outlets that are unafraid. Mostly talk radio is unafraid. It's the last bastion of being able to say what you think anymore, and support Freedom Watch's legal efforts to curtail big tech and other things that we're doing. You can see what we're doing at freedomwatchusa.org. And I would urge you to get a copy of my book, which you can get online at all major booksellers, including Amazon.com, which ironically I've sued, but they still market it. They want to make money. And read it and take it to heart. And if you have suggestions, contact me, because I'm not the be-all and end-all of how we wage a peaceful and legal revolution. And that's why we're getting together at Independence Hall to discuss how we save the country. And we've got to do it quick because it's almost dead. And we need to resurrect it. So thank you for participating in the Citizens Grand Jury. We'll be back next week at 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific for our 8th session of the Citizens Grand Jury.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
Thank you, grand jury members, and thanks everyone for watching. Have a great afternoon.